I spent 20 years working double shifts so my daughter, Emily, could have the life I never had, and every birthday, every Christmas, every school event I promised her that no matter how hard life became I would always be there, but everything changed. The day my wife divorced me and married billionaire Richard Collins. Almost overnight, Emily stopped answering my calls, stopped visiting my tiny apartment, and started calling Richard Dad, while I became nothing more than the poor man she was embarrassed to know I watched from a distance as social media filled with pictures of luxury vacations, private jets, designer clothes, and smiling family dinners where my place had completely disappeared. Every time I tried to talk to her, she told me Richard had already given her everything she would ever need and that I should stop trying to be part of her new life. Those words shattered my heart, but I never argued because I remembered a promise I had made years earlier to her late grandfather before he passed away. He looked at me and quietly said, "One day Emily will make the biggest mistake of her life, but when that day comes, don't let anger decide your future. Let the truth do it." After his funeral, he secretly handed me a sealed envelope and told me never open it until Emily completely turns her back on you. I locked that envelope inside a safe and forgot about it for years until the afternoon Emily came to my apartment only to tell me she was getting married, but Richard would be walking her down the aisle because according to her he was the man who truly deserved that honor. I smiled through my tears, congratulated her, and wished her happiness. After she left, I walked to my bedroom, opened the old safe for the first time in years, and held my father-in-law's sealed envelope in my trembling hands because deep inside I knew the day he had warned me about had finally arrived, and whatever was written inside that letter was about to change Emily's entire life forever. I stared at the sealed envelope for several minutes before finally opening it. Inside was a handwritten letter from Emily's grandfather, along with a small brass key, an old bank account number, and a legal document signed almost 15 years earlier. The letter began with words that immediately brought tears to my eyes. "If Emily ever chooses money over the man who sacrificed everything for her, then she is not yet ready to receive the greatest gift our family has protected for generations. When she finally understands the value of love, loyalty, and sacrifice, give her this letter, because only then will she deserve to know the truth." The document revealed that Emily's grandfather had secretly placed nearly $2 billion into a private family trust, but no one could access it until Emily reached the age of 30, and only if I personally approved the release of the inheritance. If I refused, the entire fortune would automatically be donated to children's hospitals across America. I sat there in complete silence, realizing that neither Richard nor Emily had any idea such a fortune even existed. A week later, Emily's wedding filled every luxury magazine because Richard spared no expense. Celebrities attended, private helicopters landed outside the venue, and reporters called it the wedding of the year. I quietly watched the ceremony from outside the church without being invited, while Richard proudly walked my daughter down the aisle, and everyone applauded as if he had been her father all along. Just as the ceremony ended, a black luxury sedan stopped near the entrance. An elderly attorney stepped out holding an official court briefcase and loudly asked for Emily Carter. Every guest turned toward him as he announced that he had been searching for her on behalf of her late grandfather regarding an inheritance worth billions of dollars. But before he could continue, he looked directly at me, standing across the street, and respectfully said, "Mr. Carter, according to your father-in-law's final instructions, nothing can proceed until you make the final decision." And at that exact moment, every eye, including Emily's, suddenly turned toward the father she had abandoned years ago. The entire wedding venue fell completely silent as the attorney walked toward me instead of Emily and respectfully handed me a thick confidential file. Every television camera immediately turned in my direction, because nobody understood why the billionaire family's lawyer was speaking to the poorly dressed man standing outside the gate. Richard stepped forward with an arrogant smile and demanded that the documents be given to Emily immediately, but the attorney calmly replied, "I legally cannot do that because Mr. Carter is the sole trustee appointed by Emily's late grandfather. Without his signature, not $1 can ever be released." Emily looked at me with shock for the first time in years and quietly whispered, "Dad, what is he talking about?" The attorney slowly opened the file, revealing bank certificates, trust agreements, property records, and investment portfolios showing assets worth more than $2 billion. Every guest gasped while reporters rushed closer to capture every moment. Richard suddenly changed his attitude, walked toward me smiling awkwardly, and placed his hand on my shoulder, saying, "We are family now. There is no reason to keep old misunderstandings alive." I gently removed his hand and looked directly into his eyes before saying, "Where was this family when my daughter stopped answering my calls? Where was this family when I spent Christmas alone while you replaced me in every memory?" Emily's face filled with tears as she realized the pain she had caused, but before anyone could speak, the attorney handed her the final handwritten letter from her grandfather and quietly said, "You may read this only after your father allows it," because those were his final instructions. With trembling hands, Emily looked at me for permission while every person at the wedding waited for my answer, and after several long seconds I slowly nodded, knowing that the words inside that letter were about to destroy every lie Richard had spent years building around her, and nothing in their lives would ever be the same again. Emily slowly unfolded the letter with trembling hands, while the entire wedding hall remained silent. Every guest watched as tears began falling from her eyes. After reading only the first few lines her grandfather had written, "Emily, if you are reading this, then you have already made the biggest mistake of your life. Wealth can buy houses, cars, and private jets, but it can never replace the father who stayed awake every night worrying about your future. Richard may have given you luxury, but your real father gave you his entire life. Never judge a man by the size of his bank account, judge him by the sacrifices he made when nobody was watching. Every birthday gift, every school fee, every medical bill, every dream you achieved came from your father's hard work, not from luck. If one day you choose another man over the father who never abandoned you, then you are not yet ready to inherit this family's legacy, because money without character destroys families exactly the way it destroyed ours." Emily could no longer hold back her tears. She slowly turned toward me, while everyone around her stood completely speechless. Richard tried to interrupt by saying the past no longer mattered, but before he could continue, the attorney opened another sealed document and announced that, according to the trust agreement, Richard Collins would never receive a single dollar directly or indirectly, and if he attempted to influence Emily's decision, the entire inheritance would immediately be donated to children's hospitals across America. Richard's confident smile disappeared within seconds. Reporters captured every reaction while guests whispered among themselves. Emily walked toward me crying uncontrollably, dropped to her knees in front of everyone, and held my hands tightly, saying, "Dad, I believed money was love because I was too blind to see the man who had loved me without expecting anything in return. I spent years hurting the only person who never stopped praying for me. Please forgive me." I gently lifted her from the ground, hugged her for the first time in years, and the entire hall watched in complete silence, because at that moment they realized the richest man in the story was never the billionaire standing in an expensive suit. It was the father whose love had survived every betrayal, and the greatest decision of my life was still waiting, because only my signature could decide whether Emily would receive the $2 billion inheritance or lose it forever. Emily looked into my eyes, waiting for my decision while every guest, every reporter, and every television camera remained completely silent. I slowly picked up the pen and everyone believed I was about to sign the papers releasing $2 billion into her name. Instead, I closed the file and gently placed it back on the table. Emily's face turned pale as she whispered, "Dad, I understand if you cannot trust me anymore. I deserve every punishment for what I did." I smiled softly and told her this money was never the real test. Your grandfather already knew you would one day have to choose between wealth and love. Today you finally chose your father, and that is why you have already passed the greatest test of your life. I signed the final document, and the attorney officially declared Emily the legal beneficiary of the family trust. The entire hall erupted into applause while Richard stood frozen, realizing he had lost everything he had planned for years. Moments later, financial investigators entered the venue. Carrying court orders, they informed Richard that he was under investigation for tax fraud, money laundering, and corporate theft. Several business partners immediately canceled their contracts while banks froze his accounts. In front of everyone, the man who once believed money could buy every relationship lost his empire in a single afternoon. Emily quietly removed her wedding ring, placed it into Richard's hand, and walked away without saying another word. She came directly toward me, hugged me tightly, and cried like the little girl who used to run into my arms after school. Months later, we used part of the family trust to build children's hospital scholarships and rehabilitation centers in her grandfather's name while I returned to living the same simple life I had always loved. One evening, Emily asked me why I never hated her after everything she had done. I smiled and answered, because a real father never stops being a father even when his child forgets how to be a daughter. She held my hand with tears in her eyes and promised she would spend the rest of her life earning back the years she had lost. And as we stood together watching the sunset, I realized the greatest inheritance was never the $2 billion. It was the second chance to become a family again.